In just a couple of days, it's going to officially be fall. But according to the Jewish calendar, it's already been fall for a few weeks, and that's because right now we're in the month of Elul. In case you don't know, Elul is the month before the Jewish New Year, known as Rosh Hashanah, which is followed by other holidays, including the Day of Atonement, which is Yom Kippur, as well as another holiday called Sukkot. So this week on Yiddishkeit, I want to take you into my world. I want to show you how I'm celebrating the month of Elul and also how I'm preparing for the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah.
אני ודיידי ודיידי לי אני ודיידי ודיידי.
If you're new here, my name is David, and here on Yiddishkeit, we talk about the experience of Jewishness. Now, personally, I like to do that by exploring Jewish history, culture, and art. And Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and all the stuff that comes with it is such a great way to capture so many of these elements, the Jewish traditions, the culture, and a lot of art that comes from this season. So in this video, what I'd like to do is to look at three big buckets, three ways that I embrace the Jewish New Year during the month that precedes it of Elul, as well as during the other festivals during the season. The first bucket I want to take you to is looking at all the different kinds of music that comes out of this time of year. The second is, of course, the food that really captures the flavor of this season. And finally, I want to look at film, all sorts of representations of this holiday and this season in film. So let's jump into the music that I'm listening to during this season. I think I'd break it into three main sections. One is music that is for Elul specifically. And I also want to look at music that comes from the liturgy, the prayers that are said in Shul on Rosh Hashanah. And I also want to look at just music in general that really captures the fall season. So let's take a look at a subgenre of Jewish music, which is Elul music. I want to take a look at a few of the songs that I've been playing this season that have been meaningful for me, that I've really been jamming out to. To do that, I have to give you a little bit of background and explain some of the more mystical ideas that are associated with this month. So the name Elul actually is a Mesopotamian word. It has to do with a whole mythological landscape that I actually know nothing about, but the name roughly translates to the descent of Inanna, which is a goddess, I believe, in Babylonian mythology. And she basically descends into the underworld, and this month is named after that event. Mentioning this is making me realize I actually want to learn a lot more about that, but I'll admit ignorance for now. But in Jewish tradition, the word Elul actually comes to represent this idea of the reciprocal love between God and Israel, between humanity and the divine. In Jewish tradition, the letters that make up the word Elul, Alid, Lamed, Vav, and Lamed, actually stand for the phrase that comes to us from the Song of Songs, chapter 6, which is the famous line, Ani ledoidi v'doidi li, which means that I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me, meaning dedicated. And so in practice, what this means is that this month is dedicated to strengthening our relationship with God. This can look like personal reflection, making amends, contemplating the big questions in life. And so based on this, there are several other ideas that come about. The first of which comes to us from a rabbi named Shneur Zalman of Liadi, also known as the Alter Rebbe. He is the founder of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, which is now world famous. And so the Alter Rebbe provides a visual which helps give the vibe to this month. He explains this idea of the reciprocal love between the divine and humanity, Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li, to be represented by a king. In fact, one of the core themes of the Jewish New Year is about accepting God as king. And we'll get to this in just a moment when we look at the music from the prayers. And so on the Jewish New Year, the king is on his throne, so to speak, meaning we show a lot of reverence, we do a lot of symbolic rituals. All this pomp and circumstance is equivalent to going to visit a king when he's in the castle, in the palace. There's a lot of formality involved. However, during Elul, the king is in the field, or in Hebrew, Hamelech Basadeh, which means that we're able to achieve a closeness with God in a way that doesn't require all that formality. It can be a lot more personal. And so first of all, you can see how this is kind of an appealing message to some of us reflecting on life and God and these big questions in a very rigid way can sometimes be difficult. And a more personalized approach definitely works a lot better. So this idea appeals to me for that reason. And second of all, the visual of just a field at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, I think is like the perfect aesthetic. This phrase, Hamelech Basara, is kind of the subtitle to the month of Elul. In fact, there's this song that was put out by this band called Pumbedisa. The band is named after a city in ancient Persia called Pumbedita. There are a lot of Talmudic academies there, so it's mentioned in the Talmud. They put out a song with this production company called Thank You Hashem, which is labeled Elul, and the lyrics are not very complicated. It's basically everything I just told you. The name Elul, Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li, and the concept of Hamelech Basada.
אלול 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 heilige chodesh elul אלול 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 המלך מסעדה.
Also, I opened this video with the sound from a video posted by the band Zusha to their Instagram a few years ago. Zusha is this Jewish band, and they put out a lot of interesting music. Their signature style is taking a lot of classic Jewish wisdom and sayings or quotes from different books and scriptures and putting it to really modern, trendy, indie sounds. And they got this really interesting fusion of literally tradition and modernity. So they have several studio albums that are quite good, but they also post their experiments to Instagram where you can see kind of like a taste of what they're thinking during that time. And they posted a video with the same exact lyrics, but their own take on this idea from the Alter Rebbe.
המלך בשדה בשדה.
And so this idea of Elul being a time to get close with God in a more casual, relaxed, personal way actually comes from scripture, from the book of Yeshayahu or Isaiah. In chapter 55, there's a series of verses which goes as follows: Dirshu Hashem bihimatzai, seek out God when he is found. Karahu b'yosei karaiv, call out to him when he is close. This is the idea we've been discussing of seeking out God when he is more, quote, available, meaning during this more informal time of self-reflection. I think it matches this aesthetic we've been talking about of the king in the field, of this late summer vibe. The next verse goes on to say, Yazav Russia Darkai, that the wicked should abandon their ways. V'ish avin machshavoisav, a man of sin, of iniquity, should abandon those thoughts. And rather, v'yashiv el Hashem v'irachamehu, he should return to God, and he will take mercy on him, ve'elakenu ki arba l'slech, and to God because he will pardon him. And the final verse is, ki lo machshavoisai machshavoiseichem, for God's thoughts are not our thoughts, v'lo darchechem derachai, and his ways are not our ways. And so this idea from the verses influences the vibe of Elul to understand what the music is about, what the food is about, what the movies are about. You have to understand these verses and the story of the king in the field. Furthermore, the idea of V'yashiv el Hashem, to return to God, is the idea of teshuvah, which is simply translated as repentance, but the literal translation is return. So a lot of the songs I've been jamming out to this Elul season have been playing on this theme. First off, there's a song by a Hasidic artist called Shmuel Younger. You may have heard of him, who has a lesser-known song called Dirshu, which is literally these verses I read to you, just in a song form.
Dirshu Hashem behimatzui kerau bioisoi karoi.
Another song that I've been jamming out to, actually been singing out loud, it's just like, it's so good, is by Sruli Broncher and Avrami Weinberg, called Shuvu Elai, which means return to me. Again, the same theme that I just mentioned. The lyrics are about how, despite the fact that we as humans may fall down during this time of year, God says, Shuvu Elai, return to me.
והוא ביקש תבואו, אני מחכה לכם יותר מדי זמן. והוא ביקש תבואו, אל הבית המוכר הישן. שובו אליי, שובו אליי, בבקשה תשובו בנים שלי אהובים, זוכר לכם חסד נעורים, שובו אליי.
Yeah, this song just really captures a certain vibe for me this year of the summer ending, the fall coming on, of self-reflection, and thinking about the big questions. And it also happens to be in a really amazing song. Another song that I really like, especially the chorus is super catchy, is also playing on these very same themes, called Elul by Mordechai Shapiro and Akev. Actually, a friend of mine, Rafi, was a part of the production of this video. So I feel a little of a personal connection in that way. And also happens to be a really fun pop song. This song actually will help us transition into the next section of songs, which come from prayer, since the chorus actually quotes two of the prayers from the services of the Jewish New Year, as well as Elul and Yom Kippur. The first is the prayer called Vidui, which is the confession prayer. It lists a bunch of sins and transgressions that a person could have done over the year, and they're arranged in order of the Hebrew alphabet. So the first two, A and B, or Aleph and Beis, are Ashamnu and Bagadnu. The second prayer it references is again referring to the idea of kingship and a personal relationship with the king, which is the prayer Avinu Malkenu, which translates to our Father, our King.
Ashanu, Baganu, 'cause I knew I could do better. My Father, forgive me. I promise I could do better. Avinu, Malkenu, Chanenu, Vanenu. My Father, forgive me. I promise I will do better.
The song connects all the themes we've been talking about, how Elul is a time for reflection, a time to contemplate the divine, to bring in the fall colors, and to really breathe new life into the traditional prayers. So let's continue by looking at other songs that come to us from the liturgy, the prayers of Rosh Hashanah. I want to play for you a few more modern takes on traditional liturgy. But before I do that, I just want to play you a brief clip from the band 613. A bunch of years ago, they put out a high holiday medley, and at the opening, they sing the traditional opening melody of the holiday services. And if you've ever gone to shul, I guess this is more of an Ashkenazic story I'm telling right now. If you've ever been to shul during the Yom Narayim, the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, then you're going to recognize this melody. And it's so haunting and it's so beautiful. I would be remiss if I didn't just drop this right here and add just a little bit of the OG melodies.
Nine, 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 nine. Nine, 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 nine,
Before I show you the songs, I need to give you a little bit more background. The services that are added for Rosh Hashanah are structured in three parts. They're known as Malchias, Zechernis, and Shofars, or kingship, memorial, and the shofar blasts. So all of this ties to a story in the Bible. In Genesis, known as Akedas Yitzchak, or the binding or sacrifice of Isaac. So you're probably familiar with the story, which is when God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. He then ties him up, puts him on an altar, and is about to, slaughter him. And an angel comes out and tells him not to do it. And they find a ram in the bushes and they sacrifice the ram. The idea of kingship, of accepting God's rulership over the world and over us, is a theme we already mentioned. The idea of the king being in the field and then in the palace on his throne. In fact, the services of Rosh Hashanah starts with Hamelech Yoishev But that word Hamelech means the king, so that's a huge theme of the day. The second, memorial, is referring to the idea of personal connection with God, referring to moments in the Bible where God is said to remember someone in favor, whether it was Noah or the children of Israel or Abraham, and connecting that to us. And the third part, the shofar blasts, come from the story of Abraham directly, where the horns of the ram were stuck in the bush, and a shofar is the horn of an animal, usually a male sheep, which is a ram. So when it comes to music for the season, particularly for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, an artist that you have to mention is, of course, Ishai Ribo. He is an Israeli artist who also takes a lot of traditional ideas and puts them to more modern sounds. He has a whole album dedicated just to songs for Elul, known as Elul 5779, and he also has a bunch of other songs that are also for this time of year. So, one song that I've really been playing this year is called Melech, which comes from the same word as Melech, which is king. I want to play you a brief clip when he played this song at Madison Square Garden in 2024.
מלוך כל העולם כולו בכבודך חיי וינשא על כל הארץ בקרבך.
Another song of his that I want to play for you comes from the second part, which is called Ata Zeicher, meaning you, God, remembers. And it's the piece that opens up that portion of the prayer where we reference all those moments in the Bible where God is said to remember. And it's a collaboration with him and artist named Mordechai Ben David. And it's a beautiful, beautiful song. Honestly, this song plays year round.
אתה זוכר מעשה עולם ופוקד כל יצורי קדם לפניך נגלו כל תעלומות והמון נסתרות נסתרות.
It's so heartfelt. It just captures a certain really intensely Jewish energy that it surpasses the Elul category. It's just like a really good Jewish song. And the final song from the prayers that I'll play for you is from this thing called the Tzema Project. What they do is they collaborate with big Jewish artists to take traditional Jewish songs and rearrange them in a more modern sound. And so this is a collaboration with Yonatan Razel. After we blow the shofar blasts, we say, may our prayers and our service, may it go up to God and be received.
יעלה תחנוננו יבוא שבתנו מבוקר ויראה רינוננו עד ערב.
The way they do the song is just so haunting and heartfelt that it also just captures the essence of the Jewish fall season. It's impossible to talk about music from the fall without talking about jazz. If you know me at all, you know that I love jazz and it's basically always playing in the background. But during the fall, I tend to play specific tracks. The first song I love to play is Autumn in New York. Now, there are a lot of different takes and versions on this song. My particular favorites come from the artist Chet Baker. I just love his take on this song. It's so spooky and haunting and cozy at the same time. And it's that unique blend that is so special and I think really captures the essence of fall, that it's super cozy and super spooky. Another take that I really love is by Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong.
Autumn in New York, why does it seem so inviting?
To me, Ella Fitzgerald is just kind of the soundtrack of fall in general. Another jazz artist that really captures the essence of fall is Vince Guaraldi, who has a lot of music for the fall and also the winter season and holidays. So let's move on to the next section about ways that I'm celebrating this season, which is the food. There are so many flavors that make up the core flavor palette of this season, and I want to walk through some of them with you. And they come from a few different sources. As we mentioned, Rosh Hashanah is the new year, and in Jewishness, it's very symbolic. And so whatever happens on Rosh Hashanah really sets the tone for the rest of the year, and food is no different. And so we try to focus on eating sweet foods in order to have a sweet new year. And particularly honey is the main staple of the season. Famously, there's dipping the apple into honey, but there's also honey cake and, of course, honey cookies. Mm. You know it's the Jewish New Year when you have one of these. Other symbolic foods that are eaten in Rosh Hashanah come from the Talmud. In case you're unfamiliar, is a collection of conversations between rabbis that lived in Mesopotamia, Babylon, Persia during the 4th and 5th centuries. In the volume called Croesus, the sage Abaye talks about how he would recommend eating 5 symbolic foods on Rosh Hashanah. And the reason for this is that the names of all of these foods sound similar to an affirmation in Hebrew. The first one on the list actually is probably the most obvious fall food, which is pumpkin, or anything that's kind of related, like a squash or a gourd or things like that. In Aramaic, a pumpkin is kara, and in Hebrew, kara means to rip. And so the affirmation is that God should rip up the bad decrees. These pumpkins are getting rid of these bad vibes. The second on the list are any kind of beans or clovers, fenugreek, black-eyed peas, whatever. All that in Aramaic is called rubia. And in Hebrew, it's related to the word yirbu, which means to increase. So we say that our merits, the good vibes, should increase. Next on the list are leeks, which are a type of onion, and in Aramaic, they're called karti. In Hebrew, that means to cut off. So we say that our enemies should be cut off. Then we have beets, which in Aramaic are called silka, which also means to end. And so we say that the bad vibes, our enemies, should come to an end. And the final food Abaya recommends is dates, which are called tamri, which is related to the word tam, which means to complete or end. And we say that all the haters should come to an end. However, there are other foods that are also symbolic. For example, dates are one of the Shivas Haminim, one of the 7 symbolic foods that come from the land of Israel, as well as another food, which is pomegranate, and famously has a lot of seeds, so we eat that so our merits should increase like the seeds of a pomegranate. Other foods that are eaten are fish, so we should be fruitful and multiply like fish, as well as eating the head of a fish, so that way we should get a head start and not be left behind. In fact, the head of a fish always makes me think of the Sopranos episode where Tony's walking on the boardwalk in his dream, and there's like a fish that's talking to him, and I always just think about like the head of the fish that talks. And the reason for that is because there was a film that was released a bunch of years ago, I think around 2001 or so, that was the first installment of a series of films called Agent MS. And the first episode is about a talking fish head.
One of your fish heads just talked.
What did it say?
It said the chauffeur is not kosher.
What do you think it means?
With Rosh Hashanah coming, someone had better find out.
On this note, I think we should transition to the final bucket, which is the movies that I'm watching during the season that are really getting me into the Elul vibes in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. First off, we have a movie called Liberty Heights. The reason why it's first on my list is because it opens and closes with Rosh Hashanah. The movie opens with the main character, Ben Kurtzman, writing this essay at the start of his senior year of high school. In this essay, which is supposed to be about what he did the previous summer, it turns into this reflection of his Jewishness and immediately cuts to the prayer services on Rosh Hashanah. The movie is all about this theme of Jewish identity, particularly in the context of romance and relationships with people outside the faith. We soon learn that Ben's father has this personal tradition to sneak out of the temple early and go to the Cadillac dealership in order to see the latest model.
Like clockwork, if it's Rosh Hashanah, Nate and Charlie must pay a visit.
What can I say? It's tradition.
The canna sings, that's our cue to see the new caddy.
Pretty. Pretty and green.
They're calling it mist green.
Is that what they're calling it?
And then a little bit later on, we also get to see the family at their Rosh Hashanah dinner.
Meanwhile, I've got everybody waiting for me on a Rosh Hashanah dinner.
There are 2 interesting things about this dinner. The first is the topic of conversation, because this movie takes place in the 1950s during the Cold War between the West and the communists. They're discussing McCarthyism, which was the era where people who were suspected or actual communists were investigated in a public way, including many Jews. And so we can see the main characters reflecting on their Jewishness in a political sense during that era. And so in the modern era, this time of year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is also a time to reflect on our Jewishness, what it means to be a Jew in America.
A person is a communist or a socialist. What does that mean in and of itself? If you say you're a communist and you want to blow up a building or sell secrets to a spy, that's a different situation. But if you believe in a different economic system, that should have no effect, period.
No idea what this has to do with McCarthy, but thanks.
The big problem with McCarthy is he pushes his ideals and beliefs with intimidation, and that is very dangerous.
Another thing you'll notice on the table is the round challah, which again is another symbolic food that is often eaten during this time of year. The round challah symbolizes the cycle of life, and we of course want to make it sweet, so we add honey to the challah, and often people will also add in raisins into the challah dough before they bake it. At the end of the movie, the father has to be taken in by the authorities, and so one of his sons who has some connections tries to make sure that the father is able to upkeep his tradition of going to see the latest Cadillac.
Just to see if there's a way that they could not have my father arrested until after the Rosh Hashanah services and after he sees the new Cadillac.
But is that part of the religious service?
It is with him.
The movie closes on an almost identical scene of the Rosh Hashanah services, with the major difference that although the father's slipping out of the temple, he's really saying goodbye to his family. Another movie that also has an interesting Rosh Hashanah moment that I rewatched this season was School Ties. This movie is about a young man named David who gets a scholarship to play football for a very prestigious high school. Although at first he doesn't disclose his Jewishness to his classmates, and eventually when it comes out, it becomes a real point of contention. And again, we can see this theme of contemplating one's own Jewishness, especially in a social and political setting. There is a moment early on in the film where there's this big football game that happens to fall out on Rosh Hashanah, and David's father at one point reminds him of the fact that it's going to be the Jewish New Year.
Don't forget Saturday.
Saturday.
It's Rosh Hashanah. You haven't forgotten?
I got a game against Winchester, Pop.
It's a very holy day, Davey. It goes back a lot longer than any one of us. You show respect and get to temple.
Davey, do you hear me? No excuses.
Okay. Sure, don't worry, Pop.
Although David ends up playing the game and doesn't go to temple, he still wants to make it up to his father and to God and probably to himself. And so he ends up sneaking away after hours to the chapel in order to say some of the prayers. And in fact, you can hear him say one of the prayers we mentioned earlier during the music section, which is Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. And then the headmaster of the school sees that the lights are on in the chapel and finds David praying, and they have this really interesting exchange which kind of sums up David's dynamic in that school and the dynamic of the film in general.
What are you doing here, Green?
Praying, sir.
I should imagine your God allows prayer during daylight hours.
I couldn't get away before now. It's Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the Jewish New Year.
I know what Rosh Hashanah is. And it ends at sunset, if I recall the custom.
Technically, but I didn't think it'd go over too well if I said I couldn't play. My scholarship depends on football.
Another movie that I've been rewatching during this time of year is called The Believer, starring Ryan Gosling. This movie is extremely interesting and very dark. The story follows a yeshiva boy who ends up rejecting his faith and going so far as to become a neo-Nazi. During the first part of the film, we see how the main character, Daniel, is antagonizing the Jews of his own community. However, the ending of the film takes place during the Jewish high holidays, including Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. What's really interesting is that one of the main themes of this story is actually the binding of Isaac, the Akedas Yitzchak, which we mentioned is an important theme for Rosh Hashanah. Early on in the movie, there's a scene when Danny is still a young boy in yeshiva having a debate about the Akedah with his rabbi.
As usual, you have something to add?
It's not about Abraham's faith. It's about God's power. God says, you know how powerful I am? I can make you do anything I want, no matter how stupid. Even kill your own son. Because I'm everything and you're nothing.
Okay, Danny, but if Hashem is everything and we are nothing, how then are we to judge his actions?
We have free will and intelligence, which God allegedly gave us.
Wait, what are you talking about? God never lets Abraham kill Isaac. He gives him the ram so he doesn't have to.
Personally, I think that's a lie.
You think? Based on what?
There's Midrash supporting it. My father read a book by Shalom Spiegel that said Isaac died and was reborn.
No one follows that midrash.
I do. I follow it. But okay, say God provided the ram. So what? Once Abraham raised the knife, it was as if he'd killed him in his heart. He could never forget that, and neither could Isaac. Look at him, he's traumatized. He's a putz the rest of his life.
Danny?
And what's interesting is that this portion from the Torah is actually read on Rosh Hashanah. And there's this scene where Daniel, already an adult, walks into the temple where there are people he knows. And as he walks in, you can hear them reading the story of the Akedah in Hebrew. And also you can hear the translation for us in the audience.
Here I am. And he said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of
Not his
Moriah,
only son.
and offer him there as a sacrifice.
The only one he loves.
You can hear people wish each other Shana Tova, which means have a good year. And also, I just have to point out that this actress is Tova Feldshuh. She also appears in other movies that have to do with this time of year. And in fact, the ending of this film, The Believer, takes place on Yom Kippur. It uses the final prayer, the climax of the high holidays, called Ne'ilah, as the climax of the film itself. Another movie that also has scenes from Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is called Overture to Glory. This is a film that is in Yiddish that was released in 1940. It's filmed in black and white, and it's quite grainy. You can see the film flickering in and out. But the opening scene is actually on Rosh Hashanah. It begins with the sounding of the shofar. And then we're introduced to the main character, Yoel David, who is the chazan, the cantor, who leads the services in that congregation. It's at this point that we see two non-Jewish people come to visit the synagogue in order to hear him sing, eventually try to recruit the cantor to join their opera in Warsaw. The ending of this film is also on Yom Kippur, and so this movie is also going to be included in that next episode of Yiddish Kino Club, where we look at depictions of Yom Kippur in film and TV. But to move on from movies that are explicitly about Rosh Hashanah and this time of year, I want to look at some other movies that also capture the vibe of this season for me. The first on that list is, of course, A Serious Man. As we mentioned, this time of year is about contemplation of the big questions in life and trying to strengthen our connection to the divine. And I think there's no better movie to get you in that state of mind in a very Jewish way than A Serious Man, which is all about this professor named Larry Gopnik who is really struggling in his own life and keeps on asking God,
what does it all mean? What is Hashem trying to tell me?
What's interesting is that throughout the movie, Larry is trying to talk with different rabbis, including the elderly Rabbi Marshak. Although Larry never ends up getting an audience with him, Larry's son, Danny, ends up having an audience with Rabbi Marshak because although the rabbi is really old, the one thing he still does is talk to the bar mitzvah boys. And what's really interesting is as Danny is entering Rabbi Marshak's study and heading towards the seat, he looks around at the various interesting things in his study, including a painting by Caravaggio of the Binding of Isaac, again, which is one of the main themes of Rosh Hashanah. Another movie which also captures this vibe of asking the big questions about God is called Pi, like the mathematical symbol. I recently watched this movie for the first time, thanks to recommendations of many of you in the comments. And let me just say, whoa, what an interesting movie. I have not fully processed it yet, but it definitely belongs on this list. The movie is about a man who is trying to understand the mathematical patterns in the universe, and he uses math and computers to try to find that pattern. There's also a plot line where there are Jews who are trying to use numerology to find patterns in the Torah and to try to bring on the Messianic age. And all the way at the end, they talk about how Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year, had this moment where the high priest would utter the explicit name of God. In Hebrew, it's called the Shem HaMeforash. They wonder if they can use this mathematics to try to uncover that secret name.
In the center of the temple was the heart of the Jewish life, the Holy of Holies, on one day, the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. On the Day of Atonement, all of Israel would descend upon Jerusalem to watch the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, make his trip into the Holy of Holies.
It's got the contemplation themes, it's got the high holiday themes, so I think it belongs on this list. And also, this movie is filmed in black and white, and it is extremely stylized, and it reminded me of another Jewish film called The Dybbuk. This movie is also completely in Yiddish, like Overture to Glory, and it was released in 1937. Although this film isn't explicitly about contemplating God or the high holidays, to me, it also captures the spirit of the season because, as you probably know, October in America is spooky season. But even in Jewish culture, we do have this idea of the spirits of our ancestors coming to visit us during this time, particularly during the holiday that comes right after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, called Sukkot, or the Festival of Booths, of Tabernacles. During this time, Jewish people sit in a sukkah, which is a hut that is built specially for this time of year, as well as take what's called the four species, these four species of plants, three branches and one fruit, called a lulav and esrog. In fact, there's a whole movie that is dedicated to this theme of Sukkot called Ushpizin. The word Ushpizin is Aramaic for guests, and it refers to the concept that the spirit of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so on, comes to visit us in our sukkah during this time of year. And the film has a lot of different themes from Yom Kippur and Sukkot, as well as the theme of asking God the big questions and working on ourselves. And so to me, Ushpizin, although it's not a Rosh Hashanah film, definitely falls on the list of movies I'm watching during Elul in order to get me into the right headspace for Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year.
So all in all, I think you have a little picture of how I'm celebrating Elul this year, how I'm getting ready for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I want to mention that a lot of these movies also have Yom Kippur scenes, and there are a lot of movies that have depictions of Yom Kippur. And so I'm excited to discuss that with you very soon as well. But I think overall, you get an idea of how I'm doing it, whether it's through the music, through liturgy or jazz, the different types of foods that are sweet and symbolic, as well as the movies that capture the vibes of contemplation, of family, of connecting with one another and reflecting on the big questions in life. And so this is really one of my favorite seasons, some of my favorite Jewish holidays. I'm really glad that I got to share that with you this week on Yiddishkeit. If you're someone who's interested in learning more about Jewish history, art, and culture, then you, my friend, are in the right place. My name is David, and welcome to Yiddishkeit.